What do I need to be good at to be great at something?
Hello, everyone. You are listening to She Leads with Carly. And in this show, we talk to the absolute best, brightest, and yes, badass leaders.
Tap into where your natural curiosity takes you. Just making sure you're not your own roadblock. Even if you do fall, you're going to fall and you're going to learn.
Together, let's build a DNA of what it takes to rise to the top and truly make an impact. I'm your host, Carly Malatsky. Hello, everyone. I am so excited to welcome our guest today, Carol Barrett. Carol has 10 plus years of engineering management experience building, leading, and scaling productive and high-functioning managers and teams. She is currently an engineering manager at Netflix and has been there for the last 4 years. Prior to Netflix, she led engineering at Intel and Cisco. Perhaps we've strayed away from this in today's professional environment as you don't see this as much, but Carol spent 16 years at Cisco. She rose up the ranks from a software engineer to a senior manager in engineering and joined Cisco after completing her master's in electrical and electronics engineering at Texas A&M. Beyond her expertise as an engineering leader, Carol is also a wife and mother to 2 boys and leads her life largely through her faith. As you will hear, many of her decisions in life are reflective of servant leadership. Beyond this, which may be the coolest part of all, she actually just did her debut in an opera chorus for the production of The Flying Dutchman. We'll dive into all of that and so much more. But first, Carol, welcome. I am so excited to have you on the show.
Thank you, Carly. It is my honor to be on this podcast. Thank you.
Of course. So first, Carol, set the scene. Where are you in the world right now? Where are you? What's going on?
Oh, so physically, I'm at the Netflix offices in Los Gatos. The backgrounds are very nice, so I chose to actually sit here for today's recording. Yeah. But I also, I live in Palo Alto, so in the San Francisco Bay Area region. I've been here most of my life. We moved here in 1998, and we've lived in the same house.
Wow, amazing. Okay. And what I love to do, as I'm sure you know, I love to go all the way back to 5-year-old, 7-year-old Carol. What was your childhood like? What was giving you that energy? Who inspired you? What did you want to be at this point in your life?
So I was, at the time, I always wanted to, I think I have this belief that I always wanted to be a physician. So I always wanted to go into medicine. At 5 and 7 years of age, perhaps less clueless about it, but certainly as I developed earlier. I was always a conscientious and a studious child, but I was also, I didn't have a lot of good discipline and habits that you need to go into a very disciplined field like medicine. Yeah. I also do not have a very good memory, and some of those terms are really complicated. So in terms of careers, I would say medicine was perhaps the first thing that I would have, leaned into. But yeah.
And do you come from, usually physician, I was very similar to you. My dad's a doctor, my grandpa, my sister. Wow. I came from a family of doctors. Was that similar for you?
No, that was what's funny. And, I didn't realize why I had this, but I think it might have been this childhood conditioning, because just a couple of years ago, my mom shared that she actually wanted to be a physician herself. So both my parents my dad actually he worked for the airlines most of his life, actually growing through the ranks of the airlines and eventually leading flight operations. And my mom worked in a bank, and she was assistant bank manager. So very different sectors. But my mom said that when she was in high school, she was determined, she wanted to be a physician. And she was actually told that no, women do not become doctors, women get married and have babies. Yeah. And so she was most disappointed because she's really a smart person, and I wish that she had. So she somehow, I think, instilled this desire in me, even though it was perhaps not intentional. Yeah.
So I find it so fascinating because it goes back even, ancestry, right? Cultures, stigmas, whatever you may call it. So now, did your mom at a young age, did she almost instill the opposite of what she had and said, look, you go in engineering, you go be a doctor, rather than the normal construct that was built then?
That's interesting. So I actually am from India, and in India, it is not. I'm sure you've heard this from your other Indian guests as well who've been on the show, in that it is almost an expectation that you take on one of the four big professions. You're either a doctor, an engineer, a lawyer, or something like that, right? And those are a business person, and those are the successful. That used to be deemed as success in India. And so the curriculum, the education, the training, the testing, the standardization was very competitive and geared towards excellence in these fields. So no, it was a natural expectation just from where I lived and where I grew up, that it would be one of these fields. Engineering actually did not dawn on me at all. In fact, it was more of something I'd like to think that my parents sort of gave me the choice much later on. Part of it is once I finished high school, you needed to have very competitive grades to get into medicine at the time. And I did not have those grades, which was fine. I was a good student, but I didn't have the grades to get into a very competitive field. Yeah. And so my dad said, would you like to get into engineering? Because there were these other universities that took in students who were competitive, but they were not in Bombay. You had to perhaps live in the dorm and travel. And I said, sure, more of a, okay, kind of thing. And, but I have to say, it's that moment of saying yes that pretty much put me in a trajectory that I never imagined. Came to the US after that, and then met my husband, and now of course I'm in tech, and I'm here on your podcast as an engineering leader, which is quite something.
So walk me through the point of education in your life. You studied in Bombay, then you pursued a master's at Texas A&M in engineering. At this point in your life, did you know, I'm going into tech, I'm going to be an engineering leader? How were you thinking of your career post-education?
So that's a great question. So I always imagined that I would be an engineering leader because both my parents were leaders in their field. My father was a general manager, and he was, he essentially even did his first startup at 52, where he actually left his government job in India to go and join a startup company that it was sort of the birth of Indian flight at the time, where the airlines were more than the airline provided by the government. There were all these enterprising airlines that were starting off. And so he was invited to essentially start the operations of one of them, which had a very successful run for about 25 years. And then, so he grew very much. So, just seeing how he took a company, or he took his job from startup all the way to leading a very senior position in his company, as well as my mom being a very responsible assistant manager, having to have the keys of the safe. And so she was always in this rush in the morning to get to work, and all, they had very responsible positions. And so I felt it was just a natural outcome that I would always be in management. Now, engineering was not at all on my radar, and that was interesting. So you talk about, whether I would be in tech. Tech did not exist as a term. Honestly, this was the late 90s when I came to the US to do my master's. I was primarily electrical engineering, and so even the decision to go into electrical engineering was more because it was more touchy-feely, like you could feel wires and you knew what a television was, versus computer science. Even today is extremely foreign to my dad, so he's like, I don't know what you do. So it was just interesting, and so I started out in electrical engineering, and then I started my first job as a diagnostics engineer, actually, at Cisco. And then 3 years later, transitioned to software. And then, of course, never looked back. I've always been working in software since then.
So you transitioned to software while at Cisco?
Yes, I certainly did. Yeah.
Okay, talk me through that. How does that, in my mind, I don't understand. Like, is that you went through your own coding boot camp? Like, what does that actually look like?
So I had the benefit of in the team that I was working on, or the group that I was working on, was an acquisition to Cisco. And Cisco grew because it acquired companies. That was its business model. It would acquire these companies that were good in their field, and then it would scale them because they had an amazing sales machine. And so I had joined one of these groups called Granite Systems at the time, and I started in diagnostics. And diagnostics, essentially, although I was doing not software as we understand it today, which is back-end services and cloud software and apps and those, but I was doing embedded software, and I was actually writing software, so writing diagnostics, but at a very, very small scale, only talking to one system at a time, and very limited in focus, and very different in terms of operations because it was manually run and manually test. But I did want to go into software, and so I actually interviewed outside, and I said, I'm a diagnostic engineer. I'd like to move into software, and that meant basically working in C, and I had worked in interpretive languages in Perl at the time. So there was no concept of a coding boot camp. There was nothing that, you either learned it, you either had learned it as part of your education or you hadn't. So I interviewed outside. And then when I started to talk about the fact that I was interviewing outside, the leadership of the software group said, oh, you're looking for a software job. Well, why don't you come and work with us and train with us? And so that was my training. I have to say, very, very fortunate to actually work with engineers who came from Stanford. And the professor who had written the book on C++, David Cheriton, was leading the group. And so I learned through doing how to write object-oriented software, how to write C++ and embedded, how to write really tight code, how to build really, really good design principles and practices. It all came because my colleagues were all, trained PhDs at Stanford, and I had an opportunity to work with them at the time. Yeah.
And I'm curious, you mentioned how your mom said to you at an early age, or at least her childhood, she grew up thinking, I have to be a mother and have kids, and this is the path that, women take. Unfortunately, it's not completely the opposite today, right? Where there's still a gap between engineering leaders amongst men and women. So I want to know, from your perspective, did you have that personal imposter syndrome, whether it's studying electrical engineering in college versus going into Cisco and, transitioning to software, whatever it may be? Did you always have that, I need to give myself my own confidence, or how did you battle with that?
Maybe this is where one of the I tend to walk fearlessly into things, like you mentioned the opera, right? 8 weeks ago, if you told me I was going to do an opera, I'd have been like, oh, that's baloney, right? But I just tend to say yes. And so maybe that's the thing, is I don't really evaluate what the risk might be or how I'm going to fail, because if I'm going to fail, I'm actually okay with it. So I have a feeling that there must have been this concept of imposter syndrome. It wasn't quite coined, at the time. I must have had some feelings of anxiety or angst, but I never believed that I will fail at something. And I think, it's not because I will not fail, because I have failed at things. I'm like, okay, I'll just try it. And if it works out, it works out. If it doesn't, I'll just go do something else. So I guess it's that philosophy there. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's incredible. I know you say it as if this is a natural thing for you, but from the outside, that's actually a very admirable quality. Is there something, maybe a point in your life, a person in your life that you feel you can attribute it to, having that mindset?
Stupidity, I guess. Naivete, stupidity in the beginning. Yeah. But now I would say, seriously, I think it was just a lack of, it was perhaps more ignorance and more the willingness to try things out. I tend to be on, if I'm by myself, like, I do tend to take risks, and I feel that they're calculated, but sometimes they're just, I don't know. I think they're for whatever they're worth. They are risks, and perhaps other people, like my husband, perhaps would be like, okay, I don't think that's something I would do. That said, over the years, I've come to maybe a more of a place where I seek something. I seek the answer to what I should be doing, and so from that point, I think I'm much more about, okay, if I'm supposed to do this, I know I will. I know that this will be the thing for me, or I will be taken to where I need to go, kind of thing. And that's sort of become my current philosophy.
Yeah. Okay. I can go in a couple different directions, but I want to double click on that specifically.
Sure.
And are you almost alluding to kind of what I mentioned in the beginning, your faith, where you tap into, this is what I need to be doing? Or what do you mean by, I'm able to tap into saying, okay, this is the direction I need to take. If I fail, it's okay. I'll do something else. Yeah. Elaborate a bit on that.
Yeah. And I wasn't kidding. In the beginning, it was really about just being willing to take risks and right. not really considering failure over time, like, where do you apply yourself? So this perhaps maybe I can go back to, there was a point in my life where when I was sort of at the tail end of my work at Cisco, where I had spent, 3.5 years working on a project that eventually, business priorities change, and that wasn't deemed important. And when that happened, there was some involuntary attrition, and there was some of close people that I'd worked with had to find other jobs, and so when that happened, I was quite, upset about things. But it also led me, I think, to a point where I started to ask, what is the purpose of work? Why are we here as people? What is my purpose as a woman? What is my purpose as a leader? How do I define success? What is important? What are my values? What do I believe in? And it was perhaps one of those experiences that I think everyone should have, because I think it removes all of the, it takes you around really into the core of your being and asks you these and forces you to answer these questions. And in that realm, I came to, it was many years before I finally came to a point where I literally understood that my purpose, and you mentioned servant leadership, is that really is the purpose of me, and I believe of most of us, of all of us. We're called to serve each other, you through this podcast, me through my roles in leadership, and through that, and through that, really understanding where to meet people where they are, who to be with, how to serve them where they are. So anyway, in answer to your, and I forgot the root of your question, I apologize, but essentially that was the.
Yeah. And Carol, if I could ask, and obviously share whatever you feel comfortable with, but you mentioned at the tail end of Cisco, right? You almost reached this point where you had to question things. I'm very curious to know, I feel like it's so common, right, to go into work and you get very much lost in the day-to-day, and then it becomes a week, and then it becomes months, and then it becomes years. And it almost takes a very, stepping out of yourself to be very self-aware and say, am I growing? Am I fulfilled? Do I get energy from the team, the company, whatever it may be? Is that something you actively did on a daily basis, or what made you reach that point where, this is not, like, I need to take a step back and answer these questions?
Yeah, it was several things. First of all, when I was at that point, I had worked for nights and weekends for a long time. And so effectively, I had stopped taking care of myself. I'd put on a lot of weight. I wasn't working out. I was not healthy. And so, yes, I had to take a step back.
Yeah.
The team. So it was, first of all, looking at me personally and saying, am I healthy? Is my health good? Both, and when we look at health, I know we look at physical health, which is one of the first indicators, but is your mental health good? Exactly. Is your spiritual health good? Right? Yep. Is your emotional health good? And you have to look at all of them. And in that being, once you look at all these factors and you understand, okay, what are these things that are causing, their areas of my life that actually could deserve some of that attention? And that's where you start focusing on. So for me, it was the questions that I asked sort of took me to the center of who am I as a person? And it started with sort of rediscovering Catholicism and understanding, okay, well, I was born and raised Catholic, but it really didn't have as much meaning to me as it did when at that lowest point in my life, it sort of was a rediscovery of, well, why am I here and what am I here for? And seeking purpose through that. Wow. So that core sort of has helped sort of, understand. So now it's like, now I ask the question, okay, am I supposed to be here? Am I supposed to do this? Am I supposed to, and where should I go? Where do you want me? And I think that kind of led me to my job at Netflix. That helped me to be a better person at Netflix, because that was one of my goals when I left Cisco. And it's like, what do I want to do next? How do I want to grow? And I remember very clearly the answer being, I just want to be a better version of myself. And I don't know what that is. And that's all I've seen. I've just seen, just being a better person has just been great.
And what aspect of Netflix convinced you or almost, sold it that that's the place that you can actually fulfill that?
Oh my gosh, I had no interest in Netflix at all. I mean, I came from an enterprise company, right?
Right.
And so there was this leader at Netflix who reached out to me in 2017. We actually have a picture together from 2017. And she was like, Carol, you need to come and interview at Netflix. Carol, you should. And I was like, no, I don't even know what this company is about. I had no interest in it. I was an avid consumer of the content, but I had no idea that I would enjoy working there. When I started to look at opportunities when I was leaving Intel, and again, it was one time, one ping comes in, and then you start like, okay, maybe I
Plants
had
a
10,
seed.
It plants a seed, right? And I had 10 different potential opportunities that I could potentially explore, and including one of them was, would you consider being the CEO of this company? I was like, oh, really? That could be an opportunity too, right? You never think about it. I wasn't seeking it, but in conversation, it would come up. And so as I I worked harder at Intel. It was like, okay, I have all these choices to make. I'm just going to focus on what I am paid to do. And I worked really hard at Intel. And some of these opportunities sort of just faded away. And then the last one that remained was Netflix. And so I prayed about it. And I'm like, is this really where I should go? And sure enough, and even though it was like not at all where I had started out, I joined in 2020, and this leader sent me this picture just last week, and I said, I can't believe I spent 3 years, not deciding to come here. I wish I had joined here 3 years ago. Yeah. So Netflix is a great place to work. Some of the things about this company, including how we define inclusion, in that it's courage and competency and consciousness. And it's like these things that, are so value driven and so defined as who we are as humans and how do we treat each other as humans, including inclusion and diversity. And some of my closest friends now are at Netflix. And I've been able to make many friends through the years, but it's really nice that I have a very diverse set of friends here, which perhaps I had never made before as well. So yeah.
It's amazing. And you mentioned before almost that awakening, if you will, that you had of the importance of tapping into the mental health side, right? And not just physical health. I really want to know how have you implemented that into a leader in tech, right? Because there are professions where that's actually pretty common to tap into your mental health and kind of gauge, okay, how are you doing mentally? In tech, less so. You go into work, you're an engineer, you're supposed to code, you deliver your code, and that's it. How has that changed your leadership at Netflix?
What an interesting question. So I am very calm. That is perhaps one of my strengths. And so we've had so many, like any company that is going through transition, that is growing, that is scaling, there is a tremendous amount of requests that come from all kinds of places. You have product requests that come from product requirements. Oh, we need to do A, B, and C. Like, for example, we launched a plan with ads last year, and we just launched. We had our first live segment earlier this year. We've had 2 live shows this year. We also launched games last year, mobile games as well. And then the other thing that we have like so many launches, and then paid sharing, right? And we just rolled out paid sharing. My teams were involved in all of the above. Wow. And so you have all these product priorities that are coming from the outside. You have all these internal things that you just have to do because you have to be able to ensure that the current subscribers are receiving their content well. So prioritization. So in calmness, how do you first know that doesn't matter what comes to you, you can indeed meet what's there. So in that, it's how do you make how do you spend your time, right? As you say, you come in, what do you spend your time on? And at Netflix, we don't tell people what to do. We just say, this is the goal we want to achieve. And then people sort of work towards, it's called context over control. So we share the right context. And so in sharing the right context, making sure the right context is available to people so that people can control and have the right judgment as to where they need to spend their time. It can be intense. The other things that we do is, there's and one of the projects that I'm on, there's a Thanks Train Friday. So every Friday they send out what's your gratitude? Say thank you to all the things that you have encountered. These threads, these Slack threads are sometimes 70 or 80 or 100 long on a Friday afternoon, because people are like just complimenting other colleagues and saying, thank you for doing this and thank you for doing that. And this is consistently week over week. So this is not just, and this is a long project, right? It's a several year long project and still people are doing that. So it's little habits like this where we actually, and the other, excuse me, the third thing I would say in terms of is that the intent is not to blame someone for why something happened, but to understand the root cause of why it happened and use that as a learning. And so all of these examples of you can only do that if you create the right environment for learning, right environment for failure, and the right environment to understand that if things failed, because of course our systems actually have taken down access to customers. It can happen. You roll in a code change and the next thing you know is like, oh, good. Our
Right.
customers can no longer receive content. And then you get paged and you have to be on call and you have to kind of fix the problem. But what we do then, we're like, okay, you fixed it. Now, what did you learn from it? And what can we do better? And so the focus is fix first and let's figure out later. And so some of these practices in terms of how do we just treat each other as people who can fail, treat each other as people who can learn, because this is a very high learning environment, and just treat each other as people. Yes, mistakes can happen, and then let's be grateful and let's move on. And so that's been really positive.
I love that. And I love the Thanks Train Friday. I've never heard of that. And it's something that I think gratitude actually goes such a long way. Practicing gratitude is so important. So I think that's a huge testament as well. I actually had Alex Nagurney last week, and she's ex-Netflix. And I talked about the culture, which I think you even just built on it so much, which is amazing. And I'm curious how, as a leader, what have you learned that are important attributes that engineering leaders should have that maybe they aren't, indexing on as much as they should be?
So I think I would go back to the 4 C's, and I remember 3 of them. So bear with me. Well, the first, so competence, without a doubt. I think it's a natural one. Competence just in your field and your domain. Courage is the second one. And when we say courage, there are times when you have to be able to say, no, I cannot do this, or have the bravery to say, this thing's wrong. This pattern's wrong. I challenge this style of doing things. Or you might just have the courage to say, I think we need to do this and we're not doing enough of it. So courage, I would say, is a second one. The third one is consciousness. It's something that, by the way, I give full credit to Verna Myers. I think she has a TED talk on this also, and she's given lots of talks on this, and she's our head of inclusion at Netflix. The third one is competence. Is consciousness, and consciousness is something that when you are talking to someone, just being aware of their own context, where they come from, how they might be seeing something. So something that I learned very early on at Netflix is not to start a sentence with no, but to start a sentence with, oh, and add it,
Right.
and have additive conversations. And those were, I used to joke that when I first came to Netflix, I had to undo years of training in management and learn new ways of leading again. And that's been really phenomenal. And I don't think I can ever go back to being a different manager,
Wow.
to being the manager that I was. So yeah, so it's been good from that perspective. And I'll find the 4th C for you really fast.
Yeah. I actually is it commitment, candor, one of am I looking at, I think there's different frameworks, but is this an internal Netflix? Is that what you mean?
Yes, it's internal Netflix.
Got it.
And yes.
Okay, I see. Okay, amazing. And you mentioned, obviously, you're a mom to 2 boys.
Yes.
I want to know, all the time, I'm constantly thinking, as women, we have this biological clock. At the same time, you're sacrificing a lot. And the scary part is that you think you're putting your professional aspirations on hold. How did you think through becoming a mom, the timing of becoming a mom? Just walk me through that process of which, if that fear almost creeped into your mind too, of like, will I go back into work? And it's scary to go back versus, this is just a part of it and I'm going to do it.
That was never a question. I always knew I was going to be a mom.
Yeah.
I had to convince my husband that he was ready to be a dad. So that was a challenging part, I must say.
Yeah.
For me, it was more the biological clock because, I had done research and studies were showing that once you hit a certain age, it's just harder to conceive and it gets more complicated. So we got married when I was about 26 years old. And our first child was born when I was 30. And, it was a difficult pregnancy because I'd conceived and lost a child once before. And so this was a high risk pregnancy. And I wasn't ever sure that I was going to have this child,
right?
Because he was born my oldest son, Lucas, is a 25-week preemie. So he was born ahead of 6 months. So he spent, 3 months in the hospital just coming to essentially full term.
Wow.
And today he's 20 years old. He's beautiful. He had no health issues. And that perhaps, you asked earlier about what gives you that strength. I think it was that very first, when you were young, I was only 30 years old at the time. And both my husband and I realized the futility because boys had a 20% chance of survival born at 25 weeks.
Wow.
And they had all kinds of complications. And here was my son, a miracle child. He was 1 pound, 10 ounces when he was born, and he was, and he had his chances of survival were minimal. But he's faultless. Like he had an ear infection, which was his only, which was great. And I'm like, okay, but that event, I think, is that my husband says, I think it brought us to our knees and was the first time perhaps that we questioned that we really have no control. We think we have control over so many things, but it's not. It's some of it is, are you at the right? They say are you at the right place at the right time with the right opportunity? It's that, but that's never in your control, right? It's just like when you show up and if you're there. So in our case, that wasn't. So when Lucas was born, and then it was hard to decide to have a second child, but we were very clear that we didn't want Lucas to be by himself. And so then we had Brian, and Brian, of course, was born full term. And so parenting the two boys has definitely been a joy. Yeah.
Carol, do you think that people are able to reach that moment where, we don't have control of everything, and that surrender moment, if you will, without having these hard moments in life? Like you said, when Lucas was born very prematurely?
I don't know. That's a really insightful question. I don't know, Carly. I know my own personal experiences and my husband's personal experiences that it was these moments that sort of gave us pause, made us question, is it really careers or is it really, because we live in this, both of us, Silicon Valley, engineering, we work long hours, hard days. It's like you were saying, career is important. And if you take a step back, you really have nowhere else to go. And so it was, so certainly those experiences gave us pause and helped us reset and say, what are our values? What are our success metrics? What do we think is important? At the same time, I think there are people like my husband who are very clear on what they don't want. Like my husband's like, I just want to design chips. I will test them out. And I want to ride my bike. And I want to work in a company that is at the intersection of these 3 highways. And I'm like, how can you be so precise? And he says, I need to ride my bike. That was how it was before.
Wow.
So he, so it was like, even his next job had to be in this triangle, right? Where NASA is, Ames NASA is essentially on Mountain View. And so it's like in this right, it's like, yeah, it needs to be there. And so it was interesting, but his job, sometimes he just decided on their location as to whether he would take them or not. And so I think there are people who have a deep sense of what they want and what they're willing to trade. My husband is one of them. And I think in that way, I've probably imbibed some of that as well.
Yeah. And how do you think of the future? And from a professional lens, even, how do you consider, okay, do you consider in a year from now, I want to be at this point? And, or, almost how do you walk through the process of, should I continually step out of myself and say, do I enjoy Netflix, or do I need to seek out new opportunities? You mentioned earlier that you kind of had this inbound and that planted the seed, but is there ever that, intentional of, considering where you are?
Yes. I'm always asking, is this the right place for me?
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm constantly. It's just that the inbound then, makes me investigate, right? Oh, okay, maybe I need to evaluate this opportunity. But I'm constantly evaluating. And part of it is because I honestly believe that in my case, I believe that my faith or my intention takes me to where I need to go. So is this where I need to stay? And oftentimes, and of course, right now, the answer is of course, like it's a very clear, yes, this is where you need to be. This is where you need to stay. I will say that, because I have had these past experiences, I've had great opportunities to grow at Netflix. I joined to start a team. So I started with 0 people. And today I have a team of 35 and, leading all of consumer identity and engineering backend systems. So certainly the growth has been there. The opportunities, I can now manage leader of leaders again, which I haven't had to do in a few years. So it depends on what chance, like those next steps may not be, in my case, have not necessarily been a vertical up the ladder, as they say. For me, it's like transitioning, domains, like going from a networking domain at Cisco to a systems and a chip domain at Intel to now coming into the entertainment industry at Netflix. Yeah. And in all of those, exercising very different leadership skills, very different ways of running systems, very different technologies in all these 3 places, very different customers and partners in all of these 3 places. And so it's like, so I don't know what the next journey will be. All I do know is I look to see, am I fulfilled with where I am? Am I called to do things that constantly challenge me? And, is this where I should be? And if not, and I right now I have a fantastic manager, and I've been working with her for 3 years. But there are, there will be indications that are like, okay, I think I need to go find and do something else different. And then the answers, like you said, they sort of just they come.
Yeah. Okay, I have to ask. You mentioned 8 weeks ago you decided to dive into this whole world of opera. Yes. Walk me through this. Walk me through the process, the desire, how it's been. Walk me through all of that.
Oh my. Exhilarating, I have to say, Carly. So 2 shows still left at the Lucy Stern this weekend, if there are tickets still available. But the West Bay Opera. So my neighbor, the wonderful Jared Bernstein, he was an ex-professor at Stanford, and he lives next door. And I went and saw him in the Flying Dutchman. This was 15 years ago, and the thought never crossed his mind. Even though I've been a singer my whole life, I've sung in choirs, and I've sung in church choirs mostly, and other kinds of events, but never sung. And so the thought never crossed his mind. And for some reason, he just sends me a note and he's like, hey, I just auditioned for this thing. And he hasn't been back to the opera for the last 6 or 8 years himself. Would you like to come? And I'm like, hell yeah, of course I wanna. And so he's like, okay, but the auditions are already over. So I said, okay, that's fine. And he said, but I'll ask. I said, okay. So I had really no hopes at all. The next day I get a note from him and I'm like, I want to text him and bug him. I'm like, please, have you asked? Right. I'm just like waiting. And then he texts me the next day and he's like, oh, it looks like they're open to you coming. And I said, okay. And he sends me the name of a person. And I write to them and I'm like, hey, it's fine. I'm here. Is there a possibility? And the chorus manager says, yeah, I think you may have to audition. Why don't you do it? So I said, yeah, again, I'm like, yeah, sure. No big deal. I get sent 2 pages of music to sing in German. And like, it was different. It was like there's 2 4s and 4 4s and the beats are different. And it's like, it's fast, it's slow. I'm like, what is this? And I get this on a Wednesday and I have to audition on a Saturday. Never looked at opera music in my life. And of course, I'm like, how am I ever going to do this? So I don't exactly know what happened, but somewhere in that time, I managed to learn those 2 pages of music. I had to look up on SoundCloud. Where's the music available? Have I heard this before? I didn't know what the chorus was, what the section of music was called. So it was impossible to even find.
And do you speak German, by the way?
No, I don't even speak German. That was the thing. And here I am and I had to use Google Translate and Apple Translate. And how does it sound? And am I saying it right? And it was bizarre. So anyway, I show up at the audition but I did set the expectation. I said, look, I've never sung in German. I've never sung in an opera. So be it. So, they're like, okay, fine. And but I sat through the whole rehearsal and I did the audition at the end of the rehearsal. And again, I was standing there and I said, am I supposed to do this? Because that's my thing. I'm like, is this what I should be doing? And it was very clear that if you should do it, you will be asked to do it. And if you are asked, you should say yes. And so that's what happened. And then the chorus director said, I would love for you to join the opera. And I'm like, yes. So that's what started. So there's a chorus of women in the Flying Dutchman. The Flying Dutchman's a beautiful story, by the way. It's just a love story and it's gorgeous. Yep. There's a chorus of women that it's called a spinning chorus, but we're spinners. So we make wool. It's a wool shop. So I'm one of the women there, and we support the principals, who are absolutely fabulous. So it's playing at Lucy Stern in Palo Alto this weekend.
Okay, good to know. And you had your first show. Tell me, how was that experience?
Oh, it was wonderful. So the key there, so I had to learn stage makeup. I've tried some of it again today. It's just like, how do you do stage makeup? How do you contour your face so it looks, anyways, all these interesting things. But it was exhilarating. The key there is don't look at the audience because it's terrifying. Just pretend they don't exist and then just do your thing. So that's what I did. Wow. We had almost a 90% house. We had 2 shows, one on Friday and one on Sunday. The house on Sunday was 90%. We got a fabulous review. That was the thing. Theater Eddie gave us, this is a highly recommend. It's a best bet. You have to go see it. And I'm like, this is what a way to do it.
That is amazing. And it's just another testament to everything you've been saying even prior to just say yes. And what's the worst case? And I think that's very much kudos to you. I think that is the that's the coolest thing. Okay. I have to ask now more fun questions, but first, what is your most high conviction yet contrarian opinion that you think you have?
High conviction yet contrarian opinion. Ageism. So in tech, it's not uncommon that once you hit a certain age, you're pretty much unhireable. Tech favors the young. And I believe that, and actually, I think this is, I give credit to Nicole Kidman. I was she was a speaker at one of these conferences that I went to. Wow. And she said the best time to hire someone is when they're in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, because they are done with the major parts of their life. They have emotional maturity and they can do the level of work and with the maturity and the experience that you need that you will never have seen before. It is not a popular opinion by any means, but I'm so proud that so many Hollywood women are now sort of just going, you kind of see the gray. It's like totally, I've had this gray from my 20s, by the way. And it was very contrarian at the time because my parents would be like, you have to, dye your hair. Dyeing your hair was something you had to do. So aging gracefully is something that is now, and I feel like I've had that for a long time. So it's getting to be mainstream, which I love. Yeah. But perhaps it's not as contrarian anymore. It's going to be less contrarian, especially with Martha Stewart on the cover of Sports Illustrated last month. I mean, she's 80-something years old. How cool is that? That didn't exist. Wow. So yeah, it's nice to see that it's happening.
That's a great one. What craft are you spending a lifetime honing?
Again, without any conscious effort, it's been singing. So it's just been, So just through choirs, through opportunities that I get to do it. Yeah. I have an alto voice, so I have a deeper voice. So I sing with the choir, which is always helpful. And I think the opera was just another manifestation of that.
Amazing. So I can think of a few for this one, but what do you consider as your superpower?
Oh, I'd love to hear yours.
For you.
What you had to, for me, I'd love to hear. So, this one I had to ask, so I'll share and then you tell me what you see. Okay. I had to ask my friends because I'm like, I might be something, but I just was like, okay, what might my superpower be? And may I read what one of my friends wrote back? And this is my friend Jeremy, who I met a year ago. Okay. And so this is what he says. He says, the spiritual work that you have done and continue to do nourishes and sustains not only you, but your family and the many friends who turn to you for support. So I guess your most salient superpower today is how you continue to cultivate inner peace in a way that enables you to turn outward. And I'm like, wow. where did this come from? So yeah, so it was funny because many of my friends ended up kind of saying the same thing, but in just different ways. So I guess it's that calmness.
Yeah. So that was going to be my number one, which strangely enough, I could feel that from a computer screen, right? And these people that you've texted, you've been around, you've been in person, your teams and whatnot. But I could actually, it's very evident that you have this calming presence that I think is so amazing and admirable. And the other thing that I'll say, which is even, it's very fascinating to me because it's almost a paradox in that you have this bravery and ability to just go for it and say yes. And, and in a way, oftentimes you think of that as like, okay, that's not calm. That's, this way and it's taking action. But you almost do that with the most calming presence and outlook. So anyway, those are my two main ones.
Thank you. Yes,
Yeah.
I think you're spot on.
I love it. Carol, thank you so much for coming on the show. Really, it's been an absolute pleasure. Really, thank you.
Thank you, Carly. I appreciate it very much. And good luck to you with everything and with the show going forward.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to the show this week. If you enjoyed, please spread the word. Tell someone about She Leads or post about it on social media and tag us. If you want to contact us, feel free to send over a message through the She Leads Instagram page at sheleads.show. If you want to follow us on Twitter, our account is at SheLeadsShow and mine is at Carly Malatsky. This episode was produced and edited by Nick Verschow. Thank you also to our partner, Floodgate. If you're passionate about startups and want to learn more about the starting journey of those who have built groundbreaking companies, I highly recommend listening to Starting Greatness with Mike Maples Jr., the founding partner of Floodgate. He has an incredible show that, in my opinion, is definitely worth your time. Thanks again.